Welcome to Metro Vancouver's 2012 Future of the Region's Sustainability Dialogue Series, Building Community, Social Connections Matter. My name is Peter Holt, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. We are here to explore the topic of building community, particularly what this might mean in the face of an emerging trend of community disconnection and individual isolation in our Metro Vancouver region. The Metro Vancouver region is, by most accounts, on the fast track to sustainability, renowned for being green, embracing diversity, and scoring high with respect to livability. And yet, new research by the Vancouver Foundation suggests that people may be feeling a sense of isolation, a lack of connectedness to their neighbours, to their community, and by extension to their city and their whole region. Today, we hope to consider the different facets to this discussion. And these might be termed with questions like, what is actually contributing to this trend? Is our growing and perhaps increasingly multicultural population one of the causes? Is it our planning approaches or transition to a digital age? Or is it entirely something else? Well, we're going to begin the dialogue with a brief 5-minute presentation from each of our panelists. We're now going to lead off with Lydia Kemeny. Lydia is a program director with the Vancouver Foundation. Lydia, thank you very much.
Great. Okay. We are more than 2 million people in our metro region living so close together, and yet we feel so far apart. So why does this matter, and why should we care? As the largest community foundation, we've been investing in communities since 1943. We do this by taking a complex approach to our work, recognizing that communities are complex and that many things are needed to make our communities into places where people feel content and healthy. Every year with our donors, we fund hundreds of innovative projects, large and small. But recently, we've made a concerted effort to better understand and quantify how our lives and our experiences as residents are changing so that we can better understand where to focus our work and our resources. What we learned is that there is unprecedented appetite for exploring the issue of social isolation in our region. Last week, our foundation released a top-line finding of a major survey of 3,800 people in our region. What we wanted to do was to examine how connected and engaged residents were at 3 levels: their personal friendships, the neighborhood relationships, and the experiences of the larger community of living in Metro Vancouver. We discovered that neighborhood relationships are cordial but shallow. We know our neighbors' names, but that's about it. Most of us have not done a favor for a neighbor, and few of us have actually ever had a neighbor over or visited one of our neighbors. In fact, about half of us do not trust our neighbors or don't know if we trust our neighbors. We found that the more interaction there is between neighbors, the greater the benefits to the people who live there. Trust increases and optimism increases. So knowing names matters, but interactions matter more. We found that the more languages are spoken in a neighborhood, the more diversity, the more people said they don't trust each other, that they don't feel welcome or that they belong, and the more likely they were to believe that it would be difficult to rally their neighbors to solve a local problem. Now, this is not a knock against diversity, but it's a reminder that we haven't focused on the challenges of diversity and the need to build bridges between different ethnic groups. Most people prefer to stick with their own. Almost half of the respondents feel that those who do not speak English are not trying hard enough. 1/3 of us do not have friends outside our own ethnic group. And about 1/3 of us easily identify who would not be welcome in our neighborhood. A few groups kept popping up in our research as experiencing the most disconnection. those 25 to 34 years old, and people living in apartments, condos, or suites and houses. We're concerned that so many of our younger adults are feeling disconnected and are retreating from participation in civic life. In a pluralist society like ours, the bonding between different ethnics and cultural groups is what we need more of, but it's precisely the hardest types of connections to make, and we need to make an effort for this to happen. We need to ensure that everyone feels we are part of one community, that we all have a stake in it, that we're all in the same boat. We can't solve the larger issues in our community, environmental challenges, affordability, poverty, if we have large groups of residents sitting on the sidelines. A sustainable community is home to residents who feel and are connected and engaged. It can't happen any other way. But at the Foundation, we are optimistic. We're already working on projects that help us achieve this. Social relationships demand a seat at the sustainability table. I think the survey that we have done is revealing and gives our foundation and others, like planners, governments, groups, and businesses, the start of a new roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Next is Ninu Kang, the Director of Family Programs with Mosaic. Ninu.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Indian-born Canadian. I am Canadian. I would only travel to India to just vacation, just like I have many other places I want to travel, Africa, Central America. My father, on the other hand, who passed away 2 years ago, lived in Canada for over 35 years, and if he was here, he would say he's an Indian. What makes my connection to Canada different than that of my father? The obvious answer may be that I'm the next generation, but I would argue that it's much deeper than that. So what is the newcomers' experience coming into Canada? When we hear news headlines that read, "The boat people," "Refugees detained," "Another South Asian gangster," "Muslim men," "Culture or violence," in other words, headlines that focus on immigrants, newcomers, and refugees tend to attract much attention and engagement in public dialogue. In a simple analysis, we see that there are two camps. Those who think immigrants are great for the country, they're great for the economy, and they sustain growth, and others who believe they're taking our jobs away and that they're a threat to our security. But if we dig a little bit deeper, we find that people are not always saying what they really think or how they really feel about immigrants in the fear of being politically incorrect. The discourse on tolerance and acceptance often makes us afraid to engage in a cross-cultural knowledge exchange because we don't want to disrespect another culture or appear to be insensitive, so we often choose to be ignorant. It's quite acceptable that a newcomer would ask questions when they come to Canada, such as, how does the transit system work here? How does the police, healthcare, school system in Canada work? How do Canadians like to be greeted? What are some of the most popular Canadian foods? However, we are much more reluctant to ask newcomers questions about where they grew up. What are their core values, and how do they live those values out in a day-to-day life? Working in the social services field, I see that we often engage in telling immigrants what they should do, where they should go, and what it means to be a Canadian. When it comes to newcomers, immigrants, refugees, we are divided in the us and them. Anyone who is a newcomer to Canada knows that they are the them. How long it takes them to truly feel that they're Canadian depends on their experience and a sense of belonging. So it's not surprising that that immigrants cluster together and choose to live in areas with each other. Chinatown, Little Italy, Punjab Market are examples of immigrant geographical settlement that create a sense of belonging, sense of security, sense of familiarity, and perhaps most importantly, a community and family support. As a result, we see communities with strong identities often play a major role in providing support to newcomers. The limitation of this model, of course, we know, is that there's a lack of learning English language and integration into the larger community. So what do newcomers need to make Canada their new home? Newcomers want to work when they're here. They need to find meaningful employment, and I think this would make them feel more connected. What we hear from newcomers is positive experiences with social systems, health care, financial systems, justice systems, etc., also lead them to have a stronger sense of belonging and feel cared for. In conclusion, I would argue that new immigrants settling in Canada for us should be a two-way street. Immigrants are an asset to this country, and unless we identify as an Aboriginal person, we are all descendants of immigrants. Therefore, it's essential that we use media, create public policy and other means to ensure that newcomers to Canada feel welcome, engaged in society and the economy. We move from the us and them and acknowledge that Canada is the land of First Nation, settled by immigrants from all over the world, and together we are stronger.
Thank you, Ninu. Next, we have David Vogt. David is the Executive Director of the Mobile Muse Network and the Director of Innovation Strategy at UBC Magic Lab. David.
Well, this must be an important subject for all of you to give up what might be Vancouver's only day of summer to come and be with us today. Thank you. I was asked to address really a challenge question about whether things like Facebook and social media actually make us lonelier, or if you wanted to put it in terms of if our disconnectedness is a kind of disease, is social media the cause? Well, we've already heard that there are many potential pressures that are causing this disconnectedness, and I don't think you could point to any single place as a cause for what we're feeling as our disconnectedness. And actually, I'm here today to really suggest that the social mobile media, whereas it may be part of that, could also be part of the cure that we're looking for. Or if you want to put it more simply, the popularity, the global popularity of something like Facebook is directly tied to the fact that people want to connect. They're deeply hungry to connect. They want to socialize. They want to find people to gather with. That hunger is something that's innately human, but if you want, it's rampant on the internet and rampant on people's mobile phones because it's easier there. I would suggest, and I'm going to provoke here, that one of the causes, one of the challenges we have in the community is that things like the internet are moving at light speed, at global speed, whereas many of our civic institutions and much of what we do in our neighborhoods are not. And the sense of not moving forward, not changing, actually makes you exclusive, makes you very much like the other kinds of exclusionary pressures in society, such as the economic, such as the multiculturalism, such as the demographic shifts. If you aren't moving forward, if you aren't finding new ways of embracing culture and how people want to connect and how people want to participate, you are actually part of the problem. And so where I'm coming from is that social media and mobile media are ways that people can connect in new ways on the ground and doing things as they might wish to in society on a deeper level. A couple of examples of that with programs I'm connected with. There's Place Speak in town, which is a company which is allowing people to basically assert their voice and manage their voice based on where they live, and registering basically their place and the places they love as places where they ought to be able to now socially connect. So it's a social web that's tied to the places where you exist. Another one that we just launched in the last week is ParkQuest. And ParkQuest is about laying out opportunities for people to contribute to our parks, not just appreciate them and explore them, but contribute, such as species audits, removing invasive species, cleaning up streams, doing all kinds of things that are now beyond the complexity of our governments to manage, and moving them out into a crowdsourcing mode where people can get social points for doing it, but in our case also academic points and others. So you actually gamify the opportunity of becoming a bigger part of society. We live in a time, I guess my central message is, we live in a time when the complexities of living together are increasing dramatically, exactly at the same point when the capacity of government is diminishing. Therefore, to match that, we have to have something on the bottom up, not to replace it, but to balance that tension. And so from my point of view, it's very much like the Kennedy, John F. Kennedy assertion of almost 50 years ago. I'll just to paraphrase it, ask not what your city can do for you, but really seek how you can find meaning in your own contribution to your city. And I think that notion of opening up, finding ways to participate, but also convincing all of our civic institutions to embrace new ways to contribute, allowing the crowds to contribute, the citizens to contribute, and of course that's what Vancouver Foundation does so well, is what we're after. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And next we have the journalist and author, Charles Montgomery. Charles.
Thanks, Peter. So I've been spending much of the last decade looking for this intersection between the way we design cities and city systems and what you might call the science of happiness. This has taken me to cities around the world, some of the most joyful and miserable places, but also into the laboratories of neuroscience and environmental psychology. And the news is good. And that news is that the city that can solve some of our greatest pressing challenges, whether it's concerns about climate change or resource scarcity and social connections, is the city that is going to make life easier and make us happier. Focusing today on this question of social connections. We know that positive social relationships are the most powerful correlate of happiness. Nothing else matters more. Not that new car you hope to buy, not that big house, not that single relationship. It's the sum total of our social relationships. We also know that urban systems and architecture do influence how we feel about each other, and how we behave towards each other. I'm not saying they're the only thing. We need to be careful about architectural determinism, but they really do matter. I think what's important to acknowledge, and what might be leading us towards this crisis here in Vancouver and in other cities, is that getting together with other people, interacting with other people, is a bit like a dance. We need it. It's good for us to get close to each other and to touch, but then we also need the freedom to back away. But this balance is very important, and when we lose balance, that's where we get into trouble. We know that on the distant edge of suburban sprawl, the balance has been lost. I spent a lot of time commuting with supercommuters in California who traveled from San Francisco to California's Central Valley, 4 hours a day. These people didn't know or like their neighbors. Their neighbors were fine people, but they had no contact with them. We know from the broader evidence that people who live in completely car-dependent communities on the edge are less likely to volunteer, less likely to have dinner with their family, less likely to know their neighbors, less likely to engage politically. It goes on and on and on. But you all know that because many of you live here in closer to the central city. So let's not pick on the edge of sprawl, because I think this problem also exists at the other end of the spectrum. I want to tell you about my friend Rob. Rob's a diplomat, a single guy, a little bit shy, but very privileged. So when a building in, I guess it's now called Downtown South, opened up, then it was known as Yaletown, called the 501 opened. He bought himself a deluxe apartment in the sky. He had a tremendous view of the mountains. He invited all his friends up and had parties, and he just felt like he had made it. And then as the weeks and months went past, he found himself joining, say, 30-odd people in the hallway waiting for the elevator, which he would share with 300-odd people who lived in that tower with him. He never connected with any of them, and he couldn't figure out why. Then one day on his way out of the building, he noticed that, well, first of all, the 501 had been forced by the city of Vancouver to build a row of townhouses at the base of the tower. All of these townhouses had access to a third-floor rooftop garden, which was in fact shared with the entire building. That garden had some flowers, but it also had a volleyball court. And when he left the building, he noticed that people were always seemed to be hanging out, having drinks in that garden, playing volleyball together. He didn't recognize any of them from the tower, though. They were all the townhouse residents. What was going on? Well, he soon found out. He sold his tower apartment, moved to one of the townhouses. Within a couple of weeks, he was one of those people, having drinks on Friday night and even joining in the volleyball, even though he's kind of a shy fellow. So what was the difference? What happened? A couple of things. First of all, these townhouses had kind of an in-between space. Each one had a bit of a porch leading to the garden. Second of all, he was able to control the number of people he interacted with every day. Maybe 20, 25 people lived in those townhouses. And he could control that interaction by retreating into his home or back and forth across that deck space. Within 2 years of moving down there, I interviewed him and I asked him how many of these townhouse residents were his friends. He said, well, they're all my friends. I like them all. He knew and liked them all. How many are close friends? Oh, maybe a dozen. How many of them do you love? And again, Rob's a very shy guy, and he thought about it and looked up and he said, 6? He loves 6 of his neighbors like their family. So this is just one story of many, and the evidence heads in many directions here. But what we do know is that the residents and the neighborhood can nudge us together, give us those opportunities, or it can pull us apart. And why is this important? Because we also know that the relationships and the feelings we have towards other people in our home, in our neighborhood, we export those to the rest of our lives. So if we're talking about engagement between communities across the city and with people from various cultures, we need to think of the neighborhood unit being this important mechanism for building or breaking the possibility of relationships. So thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And finally, we have Frank Ducote, Principal of Frank Ducote Urban Design. Frank.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, and I want to thank Metro for inviting me to speak on this subject. I challenge anyone putting a similar position to me to try to prepare some remarks in a field that's not intrinsic to you and what you do. You really have to try to bone up and try to learn and try to become familiar with the subject. And it really gets at the core of what urban planning, urban design, and architecture, development, landscape architecture, even civil engineering and traffic engineering, all those fields which shape our environment, the professions that shape our environment, how they come together and make a world we want to live in, and hopefully a world we want to love. And I think the placemaking is the core of these kind of things. And how we plan our cities, despite all the things that we've talked about that are obstacles, your time is also important. People are much more busy now than they used to be, and that's usually because everybody in the household of a certain age is working. As opposed to when I was growing up, there was one person in the household probably who wasn't working, usually my dad, who was unemployed. My mother worked, but it was the reverse for most other people. So it means communities always had somebody there in them who knew about who was supposed to be there, who wasn't supposed to be there. Is Johnny acting out across the street? I can go talk to him or talk to his parents later. We don't have that world anymore. That's gone. I don't know if we're going to ever get it back. I think we can have an awful lot more emphasis on the common areas in buildings. The vertical as well as horizontal circulation, for example. We have pretty mean and midgy hallways. Can they be a couple of feet wider? Can they be a lighted little lounge on every floor next to a window near the elevator, so you have to sort of go past it and somebody's hanging out on each and every floor? We're doing the opposite. We're locking off every floor in a condo tower nowadays. You can't visit somebody on another floor unless they let you access them in. They're vertical gated communities. And one of the encouraging things about the Affordability Task Force is they're really pointing towards that missing piece between the high-rise condo and the single-family house, which may or may not have a coach house, and that's the townhouse forms of development, including ones at the base of towers, but also those that stand alone. Those people are going to be more, who live in those and fortunate to live in those, will have some semblance of a single-family lifestyle, but in a more denser and hopefully more affordable arrangement, and will probably have a lot more common interests because some of them will have kids. So unless you have a kid, you're probably not going to get to know your neighbors very well because the kids will be out there and doing stuff with other kids. And if you don't have a kid, have a dog. You know, because you're out 3 times a day with your dog, you get to know what's happening in the neighborhood. You're the eyes on the street. Create your own bucket list, like those boards that are, I want to do blank before I die. Well, I want to make 2 good friends before I die. That just says, oh, that's an aspiration. How do you do that? How would you do that? You have to volunteer. You have to join a choir. You have to try to build a community garden. You have to speak up positively at a public hearing. Try to stand up, be brave enough and stand up for something you really want to see happen in your city. So those kind of moves, I think, in creating the social capital, as Charles was just saying, as well as building design, the fabric of our communities and the fabric of our cities, hopefully will help us lead, and how we build them will lead us to the fabric that I would like to see as a social concept. Thank you.